But what I'm really pleased today to say is that we're welcoming Andy Stanford-Clark, who is the CTO of IBM UK and Ireland. And Andy's actually a prolific inventor. He's been involved in lots of projects, and he actually does a lot of his own projects as well. He's a sort of a hacker or a maker, and he gets involved with home-based projects, which he then talks about and enthuses people with. Tonight, though, we're going to hear about the Mayflower autonomous ship, which has just recently been launched from Plymouth on its first sea trials. So it's obviously got artificial intelligence in there, but it's also got a number of other sensors. It's got some high-tech materials, photovoltaics to power it. So we're going to hear from Andy, who's been involved in this project with IBM, about this autonomous ship and what it means and some of the research that's gone into it, and also some of the research that is going to come out of it as well. So Andy, thank you ever so much for joining us.
Right, so Mayflower autonomous ship. So I've been working with the team at IBM and Promari and Marine AI, a number of companies, a whole partnership of companies who've made this autonomous ship possible. And some of you may have seen it in the news about 3 weeks ago. 16th September was a very prestigious, auspicious date for the Mayflower story. And since then, I seem to have been invited to every lecture under the sun to talk about it. It's hugely exciting, and I'm very pleased and proud to be able to speak to you tonight. So thank you, Adrian, for inviting me. So on the 16th of September 1620, the original Mayflower set out on an 8-week journey from Plymouth, UK, across the Atlantic to Plymouth, Massachusetts, to carry pilgrim settlers to the New World. Made of wood, she was 30 meters long and weighed 180 tons. Powered by the wind with flax sails, she had a maximum speed of just 5 knots. Mayflower had 30 crew and 102 passengers. Next April 21, the Mayflower autonomous ship was set out on a 2-week journey to retrace the steps of the original Mayflower. Her mission is to pioneer a new generation of autonomous vessels. But her main mission is to gather data. So it's to really understand more about the ocean, something we understand very little about, despite how much of it there is. The impact of climate change and the impact of our pollution of it, and to give scientists more data. Without that data, we're simply operating blind. So to have an autonomous research vessel plodding up and down in the ocean, gathering data, is going to be really, really useful. She's a 15-meter long trimaran, with an aluminium hull. She weighs in at 5 tons, just 3% of the original Mayflower. She's powered by the sun, by solar panels, and has a maximum speed of 10 knots. You can see from the picture, she has no crew. She's autonomously controlled by an AI captain, and there's no passengers. There's not really any room for them, apart from the millions hopefully watching her progress via the web portal. Mayflower autonomous ship is funded by the marine research organization Promari. It's been built by a company called M-Subs in Plymouth, and the onboard software is being co-developed by IBM and a company called Marine AI, also in Plymouth. So let's have a look around. You'll notice there's no space for the crew, and that really is a fundamental design point. Once you've crossed that point, there's no going back. We can't say, oh, perhaps we'll have a couple of people on board, because here's my 3D printed model that I made earlier. Very sleek, very low in the water. So I mentioned 15 meters long, about 6 meters wide. And inside there's space for research pods. So there's these 1 meter cubed experimental pods where people can put experiments. She's powered by the sun. So we've got solar panels charging a battery pack, which is here. We have actually got a biodiesel generator, which we hope we won't have to use, but if we don't get enough sun during the day, we can use the biodiesel generator to A, make her go along, and B, charge up the batteries. So we've got the energy we need for the computers to run, and in particular to power the AI captain. With no space for people, you can put the entire space over to scientific research. We don't need headroom for people. We don't need room to store their food, fresh water. We don't need beds, galley for cooking. We don't need storage space for their clothes. Don't even need a toilet. All those things, once all the things have gone, huge differences in the design come about. and in particular, a lot of weight is just completely unnecessary as well. So this really is designed for purpose, autonomous ship for the future. Let's talk about the AI captain. This is possibly the most exciting bit because I'm a computer scientist, so I get excited about these things. So the AI captain is a really interesting blend of artificial intelligence and machine learning and rules-based operational systems. And that combination makes a really potent combination. And it's very interesting to see. I think this is going to be the future of AI systems. Some amount of trained on data AI systems, another part of completely explainable, transparent, rules-based system to do the cold, hard logic that you sometimes need in these situations. The core of the AI system is 3 cameras, one pointing forward, 2 to the sides, which have been trained on thousands and thousands of images, well, not the cameras, but the IBM Visual Insight software. We've been taking photos in the Plymouth Sound, this piece of water coming out of Plymouth, for about the last 2.5 years. And those have all been meticulously labeled by hand. So we've got pictures of ships of different shapes and sizes and different orientations. We've got buoys, seagulls, canoes, pieces of wood, shipping containers, icebergs, not from Plymouth, but from elsewhere. So we've got this huge library of images that we've trained the AI captain on. So it can identify what it's seeing, not just in front, but around it. Now, if you think of the problem, you've got a camera that's going up and down and side to side, looking at a ship that's going up and down and side to side, and you won't be too surprised to find that's a really, really hard computational problem. First of all, to recognize that it's the same ship or what sort of ship it is, but also that the sea in front of you isn't completely filled by ships, in which case you might panic and go, "Ooh, I can't go ahead." So to take away the duplicates of those ships is actually a really hard computational problem. The cameras aren't all we've got. We've also got data from radar, which gives us a 360 view around the ship. We've also got data from AIS, which is the telemetry that other ships send out. So we're getting that to augment what we're seeing as well. And we've also got the local weather station on board. That we use data fusion to combine those sources of data together. So the AI captain understands what's around the ship. Taking that data, the mission objectives, i.e. where we want to go, and weather data, which we get from the weather company sent in by satellite, that's particularly crucial because we need to steer away from storms and avoid strong winds and anything that really might upset the mission. So those will get put into a big melting cauldron and stirred around in an optimizer, which then comes out with from all these constraints and these desired outcomes, what's the best thing to do next? What's the best course to steer next? Now, the AI captain is aided by a thing called the Operational Decision Manager, which is a piece of IBM software which has been programmed with all the rules of the road for the sea, called the collision regulations. It's a bit like the highway code, but for the ocean. That takes the proposed route from the captain and says, okay, are you allowed to do this? And it might involve going in front of a boat, for example, which isn't allowed. So the Operational Decision Manager says, okay, I know you wanted to go over here, but actually you're gonna have to go behind that boat. So here's your modified route, which the AI captain then takes, has no option but to obey, and then actions that by steering the boat and turning the propeller at the appropriate speed to go on the course that's been predicted. And then we do that over and over again. So each leg of the journey, each segment is computed with an overall mission objective of getting to the other side. When we get to the other side, we stop and declare success. It's pretty much as simple as that. Now, we've got a digital twin, a software model of the ship, which is going to be on the land in the IBM cloud, showing us data about the mission, allowing people, the public, to explore the data, see what's happening, ask questions of the ship, understand more about the science experiments, and we'll be getting that updated whenever we can get connectivity. Now, we don't know when that will be. Hopefully, we'll get a decent satellite link, but we can't guarantee that, and we're not assuming that we can. So the AI captain really is on its own. It's not being controlled by somebody with a radio controlled thing, driving it by camera. That simply isn't happening. The AI captain's there on its own, controlling the boat. If we get updates from it, how it's doing, where it is, how the experiments are going, we'll be grateful. If not, we'll wait till it gets to the other side, gets back into Wi-Fi range or GSM range, and then calls us to say, I've got there. So let's think about decision making on board the ship. You're probably aware of Maslow's pyramids of needs, psychological needs, basic needs to function, psychological needs for sort of growing awareness, and then self-fulfillment needs for self-actualization and achieving your overall goals. The ship, pretty much the AI captain, has that same sort of hierarchy of needs. Starting at the top, its overall mission is to navigate to some destination that we'll give it when it starts off, and to collect data, to do research in the ocean. In order to do that, it needs to make sense of the global situation. It needs to understand the environment, the weather. It needs to understand the layout of ships in the radar range. It needs to respect the rules at sea, the collision regulations. So it needs to be making sense of its environment. And then to very sort of basic functional level, it has to manage the local situation. It has to understand the battery charge. It has to maintain systems operations. It has to fundamentally avoid bumping into anything, and has to kind of steer into the waves so it doesn't get flipped over. It's a very stable design and it shouldn't flip over, but there's always a chance that it might go do that. We'd much rather it pointed into the waves and went up and over them. It's all basic navigation, but to program a computer to do this is actually harder than it sounds. So what kind of decisions should the AI captain make? So the collision regulations say, should I give way to this ship that's in front of me or just continue straight on? What's the fastest route to reach this waypoint, given the constraints of the wind direction, the wave angles, the wave heights, the storm that's just over the horizon, all these different things? A shipping container that might be bobbing about in the ocean that would be catastrophic if we hit it. Those are the kind of constraints that the AI captain has to observe in order to answer that question. Given our remaining battery charge, how fast can we go? That's a really quite a difficult question to ask, because the AI captain has to maintain power for its systems. Ideally, we want it to be powering the science experiments, but they have different power budgets. So it may be that one day the AI captain says, I'm sorry, experiment number 3, you can't run today because I've got to make this much ground in order to avoid this storm. So there are quite complex operational decisions that have to be made pretty much continuously. And then from the vision system, is this radar image showing an iceberg or a fishing boat or a boy with a seagull on top? It's amazing how many different orientations, how totally different these things look, and whether they're down on the same level as you or up in the sky or rotating. It's all very complicated. So these are the kind of decisions the AI captain has been making pretty much every second as the ship goes along. I've mentioned the rules-based system that implements the collision regulations. It's worth just spending a moment describing this. So the collision regulations, or the COLREGs as they're known, is the International Regulations for Prevention of Collisions at Sea. It's published frequently. It's like the highway code that we are all familiar with from when we did our driving test. It tells you things like which side of a ship you should pass when power gives way to sail, which lights to show at night, all those things, all things you have to abide by. And so we want the AI captain to abide by those rules, those laws. What it also has is things called SOLAS, which is safety of life at sea. These aren't rules, but they're kind of guidance. So the things that an experienced, wise captain would do in order to drive responsibly. And it's really to make the ship act predictably as well. A lot of safety at sea is based on ships behaving as you'd expect them to do. And if they do something really weird, like suddenly execute a U-turn and shoot off over there, you go, whoa, what's going on? Whereas if they neatly just pull to one side and pass you on the correct side, you go, oh, everything's normal. So the SOLAS rules are also encoded into the AI captain. So it responds like a sort of a wise captain. But the overall policy is don't hit anything. And that's quite key, because at the end of all the decision trees, there has to be something. Okay, you can't just go, I don't know what to do now. Can I ask for help? Because there's no help coming. Okay, it is on its own. So at the end of even if it's stop, power down the motors, take stock, look around, decide what to do next calmly, that's a perfectly valid outcome. That is at the end of some of the decision trees. But we have to have an outcome for every possibility. And a lot of the testing that we're doing at the moment is based on making sure that all those eventualities that we had or hadn't expected or anticipated are actually going to be catered for, and that it does something sensible in that situation. One of my sort of deep worries is that some kind of emergent behavior will appear that we haven't predicted from the depths of the AI, this interaction of systems, that it'll do something we hadn't anticipated when it gets into some weird situation that we haven't tested in. But that's one of the reasons we do testing, of course. And the interesting thing is the ship itself is a science experiment. So we don't know for certain that this AI captain is going to work. It's a huge learning experiment. Obviously, we'll do as much testing as we can, and we're already doing testing at the moment alongside human captains on a ship. But who knows? And it's going to be really, really interesting. All the data coming from the ship's operational systems itself are what it's going to fuel a large part of the data set we get back from this vessel. So looking into the mind of the AI captain, it doesn't exactly look like this, and obviously it's in software, but just think of it as having this situational awareness around it. So it's seeing forward and to the side, it's getting data from the power management systems, from the experiments, data from the radars, from the AIS about ships that are nearby, factoring in the weather, and all those things have to come together, constantly updating to be able to enable it to make its decisions. And it's got to decide the best course of action. And it doesn't have to be the optimal course of action. Now, this isn't a race. It hasn't got to get over to the Plymouth, Massachusetts in a certain amount of time, but we wanted to get there eventually and not wander off and do interesting things along the way. Although that is a possibility. We have coded the possibility that one of the experiments could say, excuse me, Captain, could we possibly go over there 50 miles? Because I've got some really interesting things I want to look at. And then the AI captain could factor that into its calculation and say, yeah, it's not going to cause us too much trouble to do that. Let's go and do that. That's a really exciting research project that we're looking at the moment, is how experiments and the overall mission objectives play together to come up with the optimized course. So science on board. The true purpose of Mayflower Autonomous Ship is to study the impact of the ocean on the ocean of climate change and pollution. And we know so little about that information at the moment. Every bit of data helps, and to have something which is able to spend months and months at sea gathering data will provide a trove of information for climate scientists and people setting policy, and just loads of people. So the idea is, with those research pods I mentioned that are inside the ship, people can put experiments which will gather data while the ship's out at sea. So I'm going to talk about some of the ones that are planned for the first phase of Mayflower Autonomous Ship's life, including the trip over to America. One particularly exciting one for me is the studying whale populations. So we've got a hydrophone built into the hull of the boat, so we can, basically an underwater microphone, so we can listen out for the whale songs. I don't mean the Eisteddfod, I mean whales, the mammals. And we've been looking at some research which says that if you look at the verses and the choruses of whale songs, then there are similarities in the choruses between whales from the same pod. So if we can hear some whales, first of all, we can compare their songs against those in our catalogue of existing whale songs, which is actually quite extensive. But also we can try and work out if the whale we can hear is from a pod that we've encountered before. So that's really quite interesting. And in the deep ocean, very little data is gathered from that kind of hydrophone experiment. We've got another experiment which is gathering water samples. So it's a mechanical system that takes a glass bottle, opens a little valve, lets water in from the outside, turns the tap off, seals it up, puts it in the fridge, wait a while, repeat. And so it's going to gather at regular intervals across the journey samples of water from the sea. And when it gets to the other side, that water will be analysed for presence of microplastics and also for the productivity of the phytoplankton. So we'll have some good data, again, from the deep ocean, where this data isn't normally gathered, about that kind of activity. There's a great experiment on ocean chemistry, which is essentially an electronic tongue. So it's an IBM research project called Hypertaste. And in the same way as our tongue, which doesn't have a receptor for orange juice, it has one for sweet and sour and salty and bitter. And the amount to which we taste those senses tells us that that's orange juice. So the Hypertaste tongue, in the same way, has 5 different chemical sensors. And based on the speed at which they react when it gets exposed to a new sample of water, we can find out if it's a taste that we've recognized before. So we use machine learning algorithms to recognize the rate of change of the sensor readings to say, aha, that's such and such chemical in the water. So we're going to look out for a sort of a set of chemicals that we are expecting to find in different concentrations through the journey. There's another experiment looking at sea level using highly accurate GPS data. So it turns out the Earth isn't a perfect sphere. It's quite lumpy, and people don't know much about the actual sea level, the precise sea level out in the middle of the ocean. If you subtract the tides and the wave heights, then you get left with the new mean sea level, and we're going to do some work to further the science on that. We've also got a really cool experiment which is looking at taking the sensor data and synthesizing music from that, so parametric music generating. So this is, I'm thinking this is a kind of extended sea shanty throughout the journey. And we've got this idea that maybe the captain's blog, i.e. what the captain would have been blogging about had it been a real captain on board the ship, might get turned into the verses of that sea shanty, almost like a Homer's Iliad, like long story of a journey. Early days for that one, yes, and some interesting research to do, but I'm quite excited about that one. So what's happening? So on September the 16th, about 3 weeks ago, we had the naming ceremony, and that was the 400th anniversary of the original Mayflower setting out from Plymouth, UK. Unfortunately, because of COVID, Mayflower autonomous ship wasn't ready to set sail on that date. So we had the naming ceremony done by the US ambassador to the UK and the first Sea Lord, and a whole bunch of people cheering, which was all socially distanced, of course, which was all very exciting. Then he went back into the boatyard to finish out fitting. So we haven't actually loaded the AI captain into the ship yet. So it isn't actually able to operate autonomously. That comes in a couple of weeks' time, next 2 or 3 weeks. Then we've got the luxury of sea trials, because we don't want to set out on the transatlantic voyage in the middle of the winter storms. So we're going to wait till next April. So next April 21, is when we're going to do the transatlantic crossing. So between then and now, we've got about 6 months of sea trials where we can bed down the experiments. We can do more testing on the AI captain. We're probably going to go to a few interesting ports of call. So we'd quite like to go to Harwich, which is where the original Mayflower was built. We think we might go to Dublin, which would be our first international voyage. And there's a lot of interest in going to Port of Rotterdam as well. Port of Rotterdam is doing a lot in autonomous port operations. So imagine the situation where autonomous ship sails into autonomous port, and the two digital twins are exchanging data securely via the blockchain to sort out bills of lading and customs clearance and all that kind of stuff. That's a hugely interesting research project, and I'd really like to make that one happen. The AI captain's testing is actually underway already. We've got the AI captain on board a manned research vessel alongside a human captain. And so the idea is that the AI captain says what it would do, and the human captain does what he or she thinks is the right thing to do. If there's a discrepancy, we have to have a debate about who was right. It isn't necessarily the human that was right, but it probably was. He's quite an experienced guy. But if there is a difference, at least we know there's something to go and look at, and we may have to update the rules or the training in the AI captain. And what of the future? Well, the technology on board the AI captain is, sorry, on board the Mayflower autonomous ship is highly portable. So the AI captain developed by Primari and Marine AI, excuse me, is likely to be transferable to other boats like container ships, and autonomous shipping is a hugely interesting area, particularly with the impacts of COVID making crews and crew changes very difficult. We think there's a big future in autonomous shipping. Also, water taxis. Imagine getting to your own little private water taxi and being taken off to some other town, like me going from the Isle of Wight, where I live, to Southampton in a little autonomous water taxi. And also there's a role for a sort of guardian angel system that will look over the shoulder of the human captain and keep an eye on what they're doing to make sure they don't bump into an iceberg or something. And there's a lot of interest from insurance companies in the marine sector of that technology. So there's a number of conversations going at the moment. So hugely interesting technology. And this is really why IBM's got involved in this. I mean, Mayflower autonomous ship is a great project, but it's the potential future of that that's particularly interesting to us. So how can you get involved? Well, mass400.com is the website to go to. That's our web portal where all the data from the ship is already starting to flow. There's information about the experiments, the history of the ship, the building of the ship, the original Mayflower journey, treasure trove of information, really interesting stuff. And you'll also meet Arty, the seven-legged octopus, who is there, and you can ask him questions, chat to him, ask him about Mayflower. He's actually stowing on board the ship. There's a freeloading on the journey, so you'll be able to ask him what's happening, ask him questions about himself, play a game where you can clear up ocean plastic and cigarette butts out of the ocean, and generally interact with the website. Really interesting stuff. If you're on Twitter, you can follow me or the AI Captain, which is at AI_Mayflower, and Arty, the octopus with 7 legs. Arty has 7 legs, and you may notice some banter going on at the moment between AI Captain and Arty as they decide who's going to be in charge of the ship. I think we know really, but Arty has other ideas. Our partners, Promari for the funding, Marine AI working with us on the software, and MSubs who are actually building the ship. It's their project. And do look out for Arty. Now you may notice I'm wearing my mass merch. Oh, there it goes. We've actually got some mass merch. So if you want some a commemorative T-shirt from the launch day of Mayflower Autonomous Ship in Plymouth on 16th September, scan that QR code and do go and have a look. Exciting stuff. Okay, I would be delighted to take any questions. I think Adrian has a way of handling those. But thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of the festival. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. That was really, really fascinating. A really fitting start to the festival because it captured so much innovation and interesting science and tech, which we always like to try and cover in the festival. So, ranging from AI through to the science experiments that are going to be on board and so on. So really good. We do have some questions. I at least saw one come in on the chat already. So let's deal with that one first, and then we can perhaps ask for some more. So I expect you can see that, but I'll just read it out. So cameras as part of your visual insights may not provide the necessary resilience to replace the human lookout, according to the research I have seen at the Anchorite Marina. Happy to provide background, and that was Malcolm, I presume it's War, OBE, the chair of the Maritime Services Management Limited. So clearly someone that knows about maritime law and navigation. But yes, so any comments on that?
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you, Malcolm. Your insight is truly wise. In fact, it's really interesting that we're big discussions at the moment with the MCA and the IMO, because if you look at I'm not sure you're well aware of this, the rules around entering a port, it talks of human eyes, and we haven't got any of those. We strictly haven't. We haven't even got remote control cameras from afar. So. At the moment, it looks like we'll have to be escorted by a pilot into the ports, but the MCA are extremely interested in working with us on that because the technology is getting ahead of the rules. The marine insurance industry is very interested as well. And how do you insure an autonomous vessel? Another interesting question. So it turns out you can do it through cameras. But I completely understand your point, and I'd certainly be delighted to have a chat if you want to contact me.
Great. So, and just on that sort of point about the insurance, and you were saying how you may not have any contact with the ship for quite a period of time. I mean, what are the contingencies if it heads off and you don't ever hear from it again, or indeed it hits another ship and you hear about that a bit later?
Yeah, well, so as I mentioned, we are hoping we'll have satellite comms, and there are various sort of expensive satellite comms that can kind of phone us up if it needs to. So if something bad happens, a bit like where your car probably calls for help if the airbags deploy, there's a similar sort of system to notify us. We'll have precise GPS coordinates. And we're hoping that we will be getting a stream of data from the ship to tell us where it is on a fairly regular basis. But we just can't rely on that, so we can't use it for autonomous control. But if it gets into a situation that it can't do anything, for example, imagine it gets into a situation where the AI captain's having an argument with itself and it's going around in circles going, I should do this, I should do that, but not actually doing anything, then we've got a separate system called a watchdog, which if it doesn't get a message from the captain every few minutes saying, okay, we're going to do something sensible, it'll take over. So it can kind of pull the plugs on the AI captain and say, right, okay, you're out of here. I'm going to call for help. I'm going to stop the engines, or maybe go in a slow circle. And that's the kind of the fail-safe system. That's a completely separate system, running totally different software written by different people, and running different operating system, and all sorts of things that are different. Everything we can make different is different, so that hopefully it won't suffer from whatever problem the AI captain might suffer from. And that's our kind of our backup. And I say one of its primary purposes is to tell us what's happening and where it is. And then if it just sits there, we can potentially mount a rescue mission. The next autonomous ship might be a rescue mission to go and rescue the first Mayflower autonomous ship.
Yeah,
as I said, it's a science experiment. We don't know really what's going to happen. And one thing there's one truism about the sea is it's very dangerous, particularly when wet. And ultimately, the sea will decide if this mission is going to be successful or not. So we really are in its hands.
Just in terms of the autonomous car that we're hearing more and more about, how much have you taken from that in the sense that there's a lot of research going on in there? And also, how much more or less complicated is what you're trying to do you think?
Well, I have to say, I'm much happier programming an autonomous ship than would be an autonomous car at this point. First of all, the speeds tend to be much slower. You've got much wider lanes. You don't get a child with a football running out in front of you. You haven't got road signs to read. So there are lots of things that make the autonomous ship a lot easier. I mean, it's still very difficult, but it's a lot easier than an autonomous car. I have huge respect for people who are programming autonomous cars at this point. We have learned stuff particularly from the data fusion and aspects of the decision-making systems from autonomous cars. And we're also feeding technology that we're learning from marine AI back into the autonomous car industry, because it's a mutual learning exercise. And I think we will learn things from our time at sea, which may well be very valuable for people in cars, which they haven't had the flexibility to explore the parameters of, which we've got a bit more leeway to do so with the autonomous ship. We've got a digital twin simulator, so there's a version of the ocean which the AI captain is currently sailing in, inside the computer. So it's playing out thousands of hours of captaincy time inside the computer, and that's allowing us to put all sorts of things in front of it which we will probably never come across in real life. So a shipping container floating in the ocean, and an iceberg, and a ship coming straight towards us, and a cormorant flying at us. We can simulate those in the computer much easier than we can arrange them to happen out in the real ocean. So that's been a very valuable testing ground for us. So the use of digital twins and digital simulation there has been really, really powerful for us.
Interesting. I'm keeping an eye on the Facebook feed as well. If anybody is watching live on Facebook and has a question, they can put it into the comment and we'll pick that up.
Or tweet us.
Yes, indeed. People can tweet as well, so we can try and respond to that. I don't see anybody brave enough to raise their hand in the Zoom attendees. So you've obviously answered all their questions. Just a couple more questions from me. When it gets there, what's the plan in terms of bringing it back, and is it going to sail back on its own?
We hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
Well, the current plan is that it'll be escorted into US waters by Mayflower 2, which is the replica that was built that currently sits at Plymouth Rock. That would be the photo opportunity. That will be phenomenal. I'm really hoping that happens. We've also been offered an escort by the US Navy's own autonomous ship. So that would be, again, really cool photo opportunity. After it's been there for a while, the plan is to bring it back again. And the plan is to reproduce a different route. I think that of Challenger, which is the one that did a lot of geomagnetic surveys quite a long time ago. I'm not quite sure the exact route, but the idea is to bring it back to Plymouth, UK, by a different route. They're doing some more experiments. And then I'd quite like to see it do a circumnavigation of the globe. I'd love to see it reproduce Dame Ellen MacArthur's round the globe voyage one day. To see an AI captain do that would be quite awesome. But we're going to be driven by the research. So whatever data people want and what's most pressing will probably guide where we go. It'd be nice to go to some places that are quite hard for humans to go, because it's very difficult sending people to see for months and months on end. Particularly when it's like in the north and southern hemisphere, Arctic circles and Antarctic circles. So we might go and have a forage around there, but it's not an ice-breaking boat, so it shouldn't go up into the ice. But the main thing is, where can we get the most value from data to help understand the oceans?
And what you may have mentioned it, I may have missed it, but what is the range? Obviously, it's got the solar panels to help boost it, but are the solar panels sufficient to provide enough charge for sort of maintaining what you want to do, or does it have auxiliary power anyway?
It has a biodiesel generator and carries biodiesel, so you can use that if it needs to. Our hope is, and this is all part of the experiment, that we'll get enough sunlight each day to power it for the next 24 hours. Obviously, the time of year and the latitude will make a difference to that. We're doing some simulations at the moment. We don't know for sure. Currently, we think there are not quite enough solar panels on board, because at the moment there aren't any on the. Can't really see it, can you? There aren't any on the fins that go out to the little pods at the sides. They're only on the main hull, and we don't think that's going to give us quite enough power. So we're rethinking that one. But it's all part of the experiment, and our traverses around UK coastal waters in the next couple of months, particularly as it's winter. So we're going to get the worst of the daylight. Will give us an awful lot of data for that.
Thank you ever so much for joining us, Andy. It's a really interesting talk. It was, and we're going to be fascinated to watch how it progresses.
Yes, watch this space. Yes, watch mass400.com. It's going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, and
thank you.
And then, hopefully we'll be able to hear a bit more about it this time next year when we have another festival. And one of the things that would be really interesting is to make some of the schools aware of what's going on, get them to watch it, and perhaps get them to do something around it.
Yeah, publicity, particularly for schools, is very much part of our mission. And so through the digital twin, we want to really help people understand the science of the ocean and grow up to understand the impact of climate change and pollution, and hopefully preserve the ocean for generations to come. We need.
Yep, that sounds
like everybody.
A good plan. So thank you ever so much, Andy. Nice to see you. And we'll draw that to a close. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.